The event is hosted in conjunction with the Congressional Internet Caucus, and we'd like to thank our co-chairs, which on the House side is Congressman Bob Goodlatte and Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, and on the Senate side, Senator John Thune and Senator Patrick Leahy. We've talked about internet governance issues a number of times over the past few years. It continues to evolve, and there are a lot of players. It's quite complex, but we hope that our extensive panel today will help shed some light on the issue. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. The hashtag for the event is NetGovernance. It's on your program here, as is all of the Twitter information for our panelists today if you want to tweet or follow along. And with that, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Sally Shipman, Wentworth, who is the Vice President for Global Policy at the Internet Society. And she's been working around these issues for a number of years and should facilitate a very interesting discussion between our panelists. So, Sally.
Very good. Oh, am I on? Oh, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see such a full house here today. I think our organizers succeeded when they put the title together, because it certainly, I think, draws in an audience. We have a large panel here today, so thank you, Tim, for that. We'll try to give everyone on the dais here an opportunity to weigh in on these various topics, and then hopefully as well take some questions from the audience. This is a fairly complex set of issues. Internet governance certainly is, as the description of the panel says, can be dramatic. And so our challenge this afternoon is to live up to that billing here, that this can be dramatic. But sometimes the dramatic aspects can get lost in the technical details or the acronyms or the different processes. And so we will try to unpack some of that as well, so that you hopefully walk away with a fairly well-rounded understanding of both the issues and then the different points of views on those issues. First, maybe what I'll do is just start from my right and go all the way down and just have everyone introduce themselves very quickly, who you are, who you represent, and then we can then move into the discussion. Cheryl?
Sure. Thank you, Sally. Cheryl Miller, Director of International Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs for Verizon.
Hello, I'm Milton Mueller, and I'm with the Internet Governance Project, which is currently at Syracuse University, but in a month I'll be moving to Atlanta and joining Georgia Tech.
Thanks, Sally. Happy to be here. I'm Michelle Sarah King. I'm the President and CEO of King Consult, government affairs and consulting firm here in Washington.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hedlund. I'm with ICANN, VP for Strategic Programs and Head of Government Affairs for North America. And I like the title, but the juxtaposition of ICANN and Congress.Sucks, just want to clarify that's not ICANN's position.
Hi, I'm John Nevitt. I'm one of the co-founders of Donuts, Inc., the largest new TLD applicant and registry operator now. I want to wish everyone today a happy Donuts Day. It's National Donuts Day, the 78th annual, so we brought donuts in for everyone. I thought it'd be a smaller crowd, but thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm Peter Dengate Thrush. I'm a recovering IP trial lawyer. I'm the former chairman of ICANN. I'm currently acting on a number of bodies, including the executive committee organizing the Internet Governance Forum. Thank you.
So maybe just for a little bit of audience interaction, how many in this room have been exposed to or have learned at least something about Internet governance? Okay, so we're not starting from zero here, which is good. If I do see perplexed looks in the audience, I'll intervene and see if we can help unpack some of these things if necessary. And please do raise your hand if you're completely lost. Internet governance is a broad set of issues. It's a set of issues that really emerged on the international policy scene over 10 years ago. It's gone through a lot of evolutions, and it's certainly emerged in the last several years as a sort of topic du jour in the technology space. How do we govern this technology? Do we govern it? Is it governable? who does it, and what does that governance structure mean for the technology itself that we all use and interact with on in our daily lives. We have certain values that we attach to the internet, things we've grown up with, the ability to access technology or access information from all over the world, the ability for bits to kind of move everywhere, the idea that innovation is just part of this life cycle of technology that we're so familiar with. But all of that has its foundation in some core principles in the way the internet technology was developed, in a way the governance ecosystem around that technology was developed. And one of the things that makes it so complex, as I said, all these acronyms and processes, is because there's no one single place that you go, and as long as you learn that one organization, you've figured everything out. In fact, you have to go to a lot of different parts of the ecosystem, different parts of the organizational structures of the internet, and learn those in order to really engage, and that can be a real challenge. Today, we're going to talk about one piece of the broader internet governance ecosystem and landscape, and that relates to, specifically relates to IANA, and as the title suggests, some controversy that is emerging over .sucks, and what does that all mean for the future of where the internet is going? This is only one part. You could have a whole other panel on lots of other parts of internet governance, so we're just going to take a small slice of it, but it's fairly difficult and important to understand, and I think for many of you in this room, you will hear and read more and more about these issues if you haven't already. So hopefully you get at least a good introduction here. So we're going to skip opening statements and just go straight into some Q&A with the panelists to introduce the topics. And I think the first thing we're going to talk about is the IANA transition, the transition of the stewardship of some core kind of technical functions of the internet to the multi-stakeholder community, a role the United States government has had a part of for many years is now being shifted to the international multi-stakeholder community. And it's a complex process and set of discussions that's going on around the world. And I thought I would turn first to Milton Mueller to give us a quick status update on where that process stands and why it's so important.
Okay, well, those are two very different things. So why is it so important? It's important because we need to get the internet governance into global governance. And as long as ICANN is under the control of a single government, we don't really have internet governance. We have sort of a global unilateralism, which is bound to alienate virtually every other government in the world, and could lead to pressures to fragment, if you will, the governance mechanisms of the internet and encourage other nation states to try to assert control either through the ITU or unilaterally through their own domestic sovereignty. So this is a big test of whether we can actually do this, whether we can actually have a system of self-governance that is independent of nation states. So that's why it's important, in my opinion. Now, where are we? Well, to put it as quickly as possible, we're about 4 months behind, maybe 5. The community agreed to do something very fateful and very interesting, which was we're going to split up the IANA functions into 3 different parts, and we'll have each operational community handle their part of the proposal. So the IETF, the protocols people, have figured out what they want to do, and they have done this since about January. The numbers people also came in pretty much on time with a proposal, and they submitted it to the coordination group also in January. And we're waiting on names. And this is not that surprising. We all knew that names would be the most controversial. But it looks like names really pretty much has their model set. The complicated part, which I won't get into here, is the accountability changes that have to be tied to the transition. And I think I don't know how to characterize that briefly, but basically said, where do we stand now? We are fundamentally waiting for the names proposal for the IANA transition, and we're also waiting to see what kind of accountability reforms are going to be tied to that transition, and those reforms are looking quite complex. And we have just received public comments on the names IANA proposal, and we are still in the comment process for the accountability reforms.
Thanks for that. Peter, maybe I'll turn to you, and you can tell us, there have been a lot of truths and a lot of myths in the press and in public discourse about the IANA transition. I wonder if you could speak to what some of those are and maybe dispel a few of those for us.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Sally. Before we sort of dive down into the IANA and some of the detail, it might be better just to up-level a little and get a couple of things sort of first clear. The US at the moment does not govern the internet, and I don't want to spoil the headlines. You know, journalists have to sell newspapers, but there's quite a lot of that kind of provocative sort of language being used about the US currently controlling or governing the internet, which isn't true. And of course, this whole argument about whether it should come to an end is irrelevant. And the second part of that is the US government does not exercise oversight over ICANN. Another thing that's talked about constantly, US government has indirect and very strong influence over ICANN, but there's no oversight as that term is properly used. So it helps, I think, in thinking about things to keep a couple of things clear. And one of them is important to know whether you're talking about governance of the internet or governance on the internet. And we found that quite helpful in discussions. So what we're not talking about is what runs across the internet. We're not talking about adult content or tax or email or spam or fraud, things that people use the internet for. The US doesn't control that and couldn't and doesn't want to. Those things are the subject of a whole series of national laws and by agreement between countries and treaties, international laws. So no one is actually controlling, there isn't a place where you can go to control spam. And similarly, what we are talking more about is the governance of the names, numbers, and protocols of the internet. So I think it's important to keep those two things, of the many layers to this, if you can keep those things clear. And the last thing I'll just, with this opening comment, talk about this concept of oversight of ICANN. ICANN was put together largely as a result of a call by the US government in the late 1990s by the global internet community, has been built by the global internet community, and you can tell perhaps from my accent that it has brought in people from all over the world, to build a multi-stakeholder model for making the policies for names and protocols and addresses. And there was considerable oversight of ICANN in the early years because there was a memorandum of understanding between the US Department of Commerce and ICANN. And for ICANN to make its bones and to be allowed to do what it was doing, it had to pass a whole series of tests that were set out in that original memorandum of understanding. And that eventually morphed into a joint project agreement, and that came to an end. And it was replaced by mutual declarations by the US government and by ICANN. Instead of making a contract with each other, they were declarations to the world as to how they were both going to behave in future. So that ended, if you like, direct US government oversight of ICANN. Under that agreement, ICANN had to perform according to these tests, submit reports to the US Department of Commerce, and the US Department of Commerce would occasionally have hearings into whether ICANN should be doing this at all. What we changed with the affirmation of commitments was reviews as to how well ICANN was doing it. So I'm going to stop at that point, I think, but it's very important, I think, to frame the context of the discussion. This is not about the US having control of the internet or having control of ICANN and giving it up. Thanks.
So maybe I'll turn to, if anybody else on this panel wants to take a question. I think one of the issues that you see in the press often is why this transition and why now? Why is this the time to be undertaking this endeavor? Is there an urgency? Is there some specific inflection point that led to this? What's driving this now? James. Sure.
So I think there are a couple of things. Peter referred to the creation of ICANN back in 1998. And from the beginning, in the original sort of foundational papers, it was envisioned that this contract that we now have would be transitioned, the stewardship of it would be transitioned over within 2 years. So that would have been by 2000. For a lot of reasons, it didn't happen. It hasn't happened. So I don't know. 17 years later seems like a good time. But there's as Sally, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things going on in the world on global internet governance, and it's important to point out that ICANN is only a small part of global internet governance, but it plays a disproportionate role because it's the most visible, it's the most developed, structured. It's the only one where their governments have a structured role and place within ICANN. And so while there are much bigger debates going on, much more important debates going on in internet governance than names and numbers, other governments are looking at how the U.S. deals with its role with ICANN. Does the U.S. remain faithful to its support for the multi-stakeholder model and step back as it said it would some 18 years ago, or does it say, well, we like the multi-stakeholder model except where we're in control, and they're not in control. And Peter's right, but that's the perception. So if people are concerned about issues of content, of privacy, of cybersecurity, and are concerned that about where those issues get dealt with, how this transition is performed will have a lot to do with what venue those issues ultimately go for resolution.
So Milton, you mentioned that when I asked how is it going, you said, well, we're behind. I wonder if you could address the issue of the timeline and of the calendar and what the next steps are, and does it matter that we're behind? Does it matter? I think you said 4 months or 3 months behind, 5, depending on who you ask. What does that matter, or should we be worried about that?
We should. First of all, in terms of why is this happening now, you can't answer that question without mentioning the revered name of Edward Snowden. And I'm sorry we have to walk around eggshells. Nobody else in the world does. Only in Washington will somebody ask that question and not hear about Snowden. So here I am making a nuisance of myself. But that's the fact. Snowden made it look like the U.S. was all of our rhetoric about internet openness and globalness and freedom was a smokescreen for U.S. control. And again, I don't agree with Peter that the U.S. doesn't control ICANN. The U.S. gives a contract to ICANN, and if they don't fulfill that contract, they can withdraw it, and ICANN would be fundamentally nothing without this IANA contract. So what we're trying to do is replace the U.S. government role, and the U.S. wants to do that because it has to be consistent now, post-Snowden, about the multi-stakeholder model. It has to say, yeah, we are going to play by those rules too. Now, what does that have to do with whether being late is a problem? Everything, because lots of people don't trust us to carry through with this. They think this could all still be a fake. They think that maybe the U.S. is sort of saying they're going to do this, and then they're going to say, oh, it's too complicated, and the community doesn't really want it, and the Congress is going to interfere, and it's never going to really happen. And the longer the deadline gets pushed back, the more those fears become fueled by those lack of trust.
So I think we're going to probably segue from that point into the broader global context towards the end of this panel, but I think Milton makes a good point on timeline, and the world is certainly watching this transition and whether or not this stakeholder community can rise to the challenge of the moment. Peter.
I've got to agree with Milton, even though he's disagreed with me on a point, and we can argue about the impact of the IANA contract on another day. But just one fact point that backs up Milton's point about the timing of this. You may not understand that most of the importance of the IANA contract is that it controls who puts top-level domains into the root, like .com. But that also includes the top-level domains that the country codes operate, like the one I'm familiar with, .nz. but you can also think of .France or .Brazil or the other 240 odd for all the other countries. And under the process of making any changes to those, a process that's run through the ICANN multi-stakeholder process eventually comes to a relatively low but important official in the US Department of Commerce. And the fact that the Brazilian top-level domain or the German top-level domain or the French top-level domain has some the control of that has some kind of US government official oversight over its performance drives other governments bananas. And so for the irritation and the political losses that causes, if there could be an arrangement where that didn't happen, things would be much better. So it's a huge provocation, what is in fact a relatively minor step in the technical process. So getting rid of that into some other safe and stable process has huge political advantage for the current system.
John, I think you had a point.
Thanks, Sally. We have to look at the risk of transition. You read a lot about what happens when U.S. stewardship transitions and what are the risks of that. But you have to weigh that against the risks of not transitioning. And what would happen if we don't transition, and the scenario that Milton painted where it's a smokescreen and it doesn't happen. And what would happen in the rest of the world, and how would they react, and how would that impact internet governance? So you have to balance those risks when you're looking at this. And that's why a lot of us are working very hard on this transition to make sure we're getting it right. Milton and I, for those of you who speak ICANN, serve on the ICG on this panel, and there are 20-some-odd other people who are advising ICANN on the transition and how that should go, and coordinating the three groups that Milton mentioned. Timeline-wise, we should also look at when the current contract expires in September, and there's an automatic right of renewal for the U.S. government. So, a lot of us believe that we have one shot at doing this. Let's do it right. We don't need to. We want to get it done, and we want to avoid the risk that Milton mentions, but we want to make sure we do it in a timely way, but also in a correct way, and we get the multi-stakeholder model in place and get the proposals in place that make sense. So many of us believe that the contract will be undoubtedly extended, and hopefully for enough time that it doesn't risk the downside that Milton mentions, but gives us enough time to get it right.
Of course.
Just jump in. We've been talking about the transition and the accountability in these processes, and there's a lot of acronyms. It's a complicated process. And although the processes are transparent and they're open meetings and open calls, it's hard. It's the internet ecosystem. It's hard to sort of jump into the game. But it's important for people to realize that this is important and something, if you're interested in it, to sort of jump in and be active and be engaged in this process. That's what it's designed for, though it's really kind of hard to sort of break in and, starting from the sort of, what all these, the ICG versus CCWG, and, some people don't even know, ICANN, what ICANN actually stands for, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Regularly people ask what that even stands for, so that's sort of the starting block. Thanks.
I definitely appreciate Milton's points, but I would have to say that in terms of timeline, security is really important. And so making sure that this is done right from a company standpoint is really important for us. And so we understand that, we don't want it to be a process that's dragging, but given the work that's going into it, it seems that the communities are quite engaged and that progress is being made. Particularly in the accountability stream, there's been some great work that's ongoing there. And so I think, I feel very positive about the movement forward. And if it takes a little bit longer, certainly we want to make sure that we get it done the right way, the NTIA conditions are met, and that we don't miss anything in the process.
So maybe if the panelists will indulge me, I might switch order a little bit. And I think Cheryl, opened an opportunity for us to move into discussion of ICANN accountability, which has been a significant part of the transition discussion so that we keep the IANA portions together. There's been a lot of discussion within the IANA transition about accountability, not just for ICANN, but across these organizations that make up the internet. So it's an important discussion, and I wonder, maybe Milton, can you talk about why this issue, why accountability? What does it mean for the transition? But what does it also mean in this whole internet ecosystem?
It really is a central issue. First of all, the U.S. Relationship through the IANA contract was a kind of a safety net that many people felt they had, that if anything went really bad, they could go cry to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government would threaten ICANN or do something and put pressure on it, and it would get fixed. And in fact, that happened maybe 10 years ago a couple of times. More fundamentally, okay, once the U.S. government is out, then what is the accountability mechanism? And it gets to that first point I made when we started, which is we're going to have global self-governance of the internet community. Then how does the internet community make itself, its own institutions, accountable? And in the 4 years leading up to the transition, there was a growing chorus of dissatisfaction with ICANN's accountability from all sectors of the community. The non-commercial people, of which I am a part, were saying, you know, we don't really have consensus on these policies, and you're tweaking them at the last minute to satisfy the intellectual property interests. The intellectual property interests were saying, we don't want any new top-level domains at all, and here you are creating thousands of them. The registries and registrars were saying, you're presenting us with these contracts, and they're contracts of adhesion. You're saying, take it or leave it. You're holding off our new business entry until we sign these things, even though we think they're horrible contracts. So there was a unified push, and people kind of came to confrontation with the fact that there really was no fundamental accountability mechanism in ICANN. They had plenty of participation, plenty of transparency, but no actual control by the community. So in the process of the transition, there was kind of an implicit bargain struck, which was, okay, ICANN, you'll get the stewardship of IANA, but you're going to be made accountable. You're going to be reformed. And that's the deal. And so it's fundamental not only as part of this dissatisfaction with ICANN and the problem of fixing ICANN, but again, if we're going to create this non-governmental governance so that we can be global, it has to work.
Jamie, I wonder if you could describe some of the issues that are being tackled as part of the accountability review process within the transition process. For those of you who aren't deeply enmeshed in this, there are multiple committees and working groups, all with various acronyms and their own sets of rules and people involved. So I'll suffice it to say that there's a whole group of people very focused on this question of accountability, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what issues they're grappling with right now.
Sure. It's interesting. I mean, this started off as a focus on the transition of the stewardship of these functions. But I think for most people in this town, what's really of most interest is the accountability process, much less so the more technical subject of the stewardship of these functions, which have been generally run pretty well over the past several years. So on the accountability side, I think I differ a little with Milton's characterization of how it came up, but I will say that throughout ICANN's history, there have been serious attempts at increasing ICANN's accountability and transparency, and those have wrought, I think maybe Milton might even agree, some significant changes and improvements. One of the things about the multi-stakeholder model is everybody loves it until they don't get their way, and so some of these things are legitimate, absolute issues that need to be dealt with. Some of them are more narrowly focused. On the accountability, and Milton, please keep me honest here, but they're focused on a number of things at a high level. One is community empowerment. So what does that mean? So that means that the community has more power over ICANN decisions and the ICANN organizational structure. there would be more the ability for the community to veto ICANN strategy, ability to veto ICANN's budget, all on the grounds of not hewing to ICANN's mission. There would be the ability to recall individual board members or the entire board for going rogue. These are all great things. There's also work to improve the existing accountability mechanisms. So the independent review panel, which is sort of a third-party arbitration process, making it binding on ICANN, making it function better, improving the internal board reconsideration requests. Then I guess the last major change is on the bylaws. Thank you. This includes both moving things. We heard from Peter about the affirmation, the commitments, the reviews that are community-driven of ICANN's work. Those would be moved from this agreement between us and the Department of Commerce into the bylaws. The other change to the bylaws would be to designate certain of them as fundamental bylaws, which would focus primarily on ICANN's mission and what our scope of work is, but also include much higher thresholds for overturning. So that, at a high level, are the things. There are the big sort of lower level proposal, more granular proposal right now. That's in the existing draft would be to transform ICANN into a membership-based organization. This would have the impact of creating different fiduciary duties from the board to the members and give powers to the members vis-a-vis the board. Milton just wrote about that in a blog, and anyway, that's in the current draft, and we'll see where it goes next.
Okay, I have Peter in the queue and then John.
Thanks. I'd again just like to put this in a bit of context. I agree with all that's been said. I think the first thing to remember is what we're talking about here is an absolutely novel form of governance of anything. There's never been a global resource, and in this case it's the most important one I can think of, the internet, governed by a new mechanism. And it's one of the reasons why, as a lawyer, I got involved in the first place. This is a corporation that happens to be, by almost accident, an American corporation, but that's about the end of it. It's a truly multi-stakeholder, multinational body where all of the people that are involved in this process come together and make rules. And probably the most significant feature of that is the role that governments play. And there's never been a body in which governments have, either individually or collectively, only an advisory role. So developing mechanisms for a body like that needs a huge amount of protection because the internet's very important, huge amounts of money are made by players in this space. Designing a governance mechanism that could not be captured and yet was still free and nimble enough to move at internet speed has been an incredibly exciting exercise. So in defence of perhaps my time there, I can tell you that there were huge improvements made in improving accountability, and we moved from being a very closed shop where the board minutes revealed almost nothing to having fully disclosed board minutes, rationales published for board meetings, a FOIA, what Americans would understand as a kind of FOIA-type process, and lots of other mechanisms trying to move ICANN from being too closed and too hard. But I also agree with Milton that we got to the stage where there were a whole series of incidents, and insiders will remember the straw man incident, where having carefully negotiated a balance between the community and the very powerful intellectual property interests, the rules were suddenly changed minutes before the contracts were signed in favour of the intellectual property interests. And I'm not saying whether the change was good or bad. The point is that the process was changed. And there were a couple of other things. Successive reviews of ICANN accountability pointed out how the three major mechanisms were not satisfactory. The Ombudsman, very limited scope. Reconsideration of a board decision. As a lawyer, I can tell you it's great to be on the ICANN side of that fight. The grounds are so limited almost no one's ever had a point of any substance reconsidered. And the independent review process that's available as a kind of a judicial process, far too expensive, far too restricted. And all I would say in partial defence of those, because I think they've got to the point of being indefensible, is that they were governed by the same kind of thinking that ICANN needed to be protected. So the thresholds for these things were set high. But the time has come to change them, and I think the work that's been done has been tremendous. The idea of taking the affirmations that ICANN made as to how it was going to operate out of a bilateral agreement and putting it into the bylaw so it is truly directed at the world, strengthening all the other points, and I won't go over them again, that Milton and others have raised. What I would caution, I guess, is to take very carefully the major change that's coming with these accountability mechanisms, which is to start turning the individual integers of ICANN into legal structures in their own right. Again, it may be required, but I would just caution that we approach that very carefully, again with the mindset of control. There are powerful forces interested in this and a lot of money at stake. So new structures are going to need new control mechanisms. Thanks. Great.
John, and then I have a closing question on this issue, and we'll switch to the hot topic in the headline.
Tough following Peter because he said most of what I wanted to say. Taking it up a level, the three major accountability mechanisms that ICANN currently has, as Peter mentioned, the ombudsman, the reconsideration request, and the independent review process. They're all advisory to the same body that made the decision in the first place. So that's what we're trying to deal with and trying to change. Corporations in the U.S. have shareholders that they're accountable to. Nonprofits usually have members. That's what we're trying to change here and make ICANN accountable more so than it is now. I mean, it's an incredibly transparent organization. People work very hard. We're not saying that anyone in ICANN's history has made mistakes or done anything wrong, but what we need is to make sure in this opportunity to make sure that we set up a process for ICANN accountability that makes sense going forward.
So, Peter, to follow up on something you said, this is a fairly new thing we're trying to do. Transition the last vestiges of a government oversight to a truly international multi-stakeholder system. Are there lessons learned in this discussion of accountability that could be applied beyond this specific context to the broader internet ecosystem? Are there things that I marvel at the number of people and minds and energy that's been put into this. People take it very seriously. Businesses depend upon it. We all depend upon this going well. Are there things we can start to glean at this stage of the process for other parts of the ecosystem?
Well, I'm sure there are other experts on the panel who can address that better than I can. What I would say is that what I've seen is first of all, ICANN didn't invent, but I think it's pioneered aspects of the multi-stakeholder system. I think we draw a lot of what ICANN does from systems pioneered in the Internet Engineering Task Force, where the technical policies for the Internet are made, and many of the ideas of the open fora and the groups come from that. I think ICANN was more difficult because trademark lawyers and others arrived with a slightly more argumentative stance, and of course the whole governmental relationship rose. But what we have seen is that move out of ICANN, and it's gone into the WSIS process, for example, and people, some of them in this room, fought very hard when the United Nations was developing its World Summit on the Information Society, and fought to make that a multi-stakeholder process where civil society, the technical community, academia and governments all can address the thing. So I think we're seeing this concept moving out into broader fields.
Okay, so one thing, Tim, I'm not sure where you are in the room, but one thing it might be helpful if people want more information on sort of the nuts and bolts of IANA, how it works. There are a lot of very good resources. ICANN has done some great work. There's some pieces on the ICG website, and maybe we could send some pointers if there's a sign-up sheet or something to people in this room. So if you want to know and understand more deeply how it works, I think there's some great things to get you started. And I know any people up here and many in the audience would be happy to help with that. So now I'm going to switch gears to the other topic, which is, well, it says here Congress.Sucks, but I'm not going to take that one on. But it does talk about the .sucks domain controversy. So let's go to the controversy. We'll see if we get some more drama in the room now, which is what we were promised. I think that maybe the place to start first is with sort of new GTLDs. I mean, it's not so much new anymore, but maybe that's the first basis, and then we can move into the specifics of this specific GTLD. But Jamie, do you want to kind of give us the room an overview of why we're even having this conversation? What is the new GTLD program, and what's
Sure.
happening now?
So to take a step back, there's really two things that ICANN does. One is we perform these technical functions, which is the subject of the transition. And the other is we facilitate policy development related to those functions. So related to the naming function in the root zone file is generic top-level domains, registries, as well as registrars. And when we were started, one of our mandates was to increase competition in the domain name space. At the time, there was effectively one registry and one registrar. We did a lot of work in the registrar space. Registrars are like GoDaddy or Enum. They sell names to on the retail market, and we went from one registrar to now we have close to 1,000, and the prices have come down. From $80 a name to $7. Beginning in 2005, there was an effort in the community to open up the registry space, so the top-level domain space, to competition, to greater competition. There was, up until 2010, I think 21 or 22, depending on how you count, generic top-level domains. And as Peter indicated, these are different from country codes, which are sovereign assets of individual nations, and they set the policies for these. We had a couple of experiments along the way. After an 8-year, after a 3-year process, the new policy came out that were basically the principles that would drive the opening up of this market. And then for the subsequent 5 years, the community worked on developing the rule book, or what was called the applicant guidebook, which set the rules for both applying as well as running these new GTLDs. And some of the lessons we learned from the early experiments was that ICANN's not very good at picking which top-level domain is going to succeed. We had very limited launches of a handful of top-level domains. This time we were going to get out of the way, and we would let the community decide, the market, communities, others, what top-level domains may attract the most traffic. But at the same time, we developed a stringent evaluation process that all these applications would go through to ensure that they were financially sound, operationally sound, technically sound, that they didn't, at the top level, violate any trademark rights of others. And then we also developed objection mechanisms so people could object to these top-level domains being given out. As well as procedures post-delegation after they're in where people can ask for names to be at the second level or the top level to be revoked under certain grounds. So that's the process. We ended up with some 1,930 applications. We've delegated almost 650. In other words, we put almost 650 into the route. There will be likely a total of 1,400 that are delegated. Those are individual ones. And I can go to .sucks if you want, or you can go.
So we have a whole host of new top-level domains in the root now, which brings us to the one that is in the press most often lately, which is .sucks. And people are irritated, people are concerned. Lots of hands ringing over this particular one. Michelle, maybe can I turn to you? Can you explain what the controversy is? What's the consternation over this particular top-level domain?
So with .sucks, there was the registry. People can have to, if they want to reserve their name, pay the people who are running .sucks for their name, and they set what the price was. And if you don't register, then you potentially could be squatted by someone else that could be on the general availability. Peter just said, that trademark lawyers were argumentative through the process. Someone has to speak up for intellectual property, and so, it would make sense that the trademark community would. And so that also talks to sort of bigger questions about this whole process and the role of the different parts of the community. And one I would just add, as we sort of move forward with whatever the future of ICANN and the IANA transition looks like, is that if the community has the power to run the process or control the process, their input has to be enforceable. I mean, if you just sort of say, well, we're just going to say this, well, there's free speech, but it has to be enforceable. There has to be some mechanism, whether it's an adjudication body or someone, that then goes the process, which on the .sucks, so that's one piece. But then on the .sucks, there was a request made by ICANN or a letter sent by ICANN to the Federal Trade Commission and the corresponding Canadian body, as the registry who runs .sucks is based in Canada, and the FTC indicated that this was sort of not in their jurisdiction and sort of punted it back. And it's unclear sort of what the future looks like, but there are some challenges here because the road is hazy, the road's not clear, and security and squatting is a problem.
I'm going to turn, Cheryl, you obviously represent a big international or corporation. Can you speak about some of your concerns with this situation?
Sure, happy to. First, I want to make something clear. It really is up to a trademark owner to protect their trademarks. That's kind of like Trademark 101. And with respect to the GTLD program, just generally speaking, again, I'm not convinced that we need thousands of new top-level domains. There's actually a lot of infringement in this space, and I'll give one example, and then I'll get more specific on .sucks and some of the issues on that. So recently, there was a gentleman in China who wanted to register Verizon.wang, and via translation, that would be the equivalent of Verizon.net or Verizon.web. So we went ahead and we filed a complaint with the World Intellectual Property Organization, which we won. And in the process, this gentleman offered to sell this to us for $1,500. And so you may ask, okay, well, how did he come up with $1,500? Well, that was actually the cost of the WIPO complaint. And so there is, I highlight this because there is room for sort of predatory behavior in this space. So I understand that folks have raised the freedom of speech support for the .sucks domain. There already is a VerizonSucks.com. There's a VerizonReallySucks.com. So I don't really see why you would need to open up a whole new top-level domain just to express that. There is already an avenue for that. And last time I checked, I would bet most people in this room haven't got onto one of the sites that end in .biz. You probably went onto .com today because most of the traffic is still gravitating through .com. Another issue is with respect to the process behind this. So this is actually, I did a little bit of more research on this. This seems to be one of the most expensive of all the top-level domains at $2,400. Others range from about $20 to $700. And if I'm wrong on that, someone can call me out on that. But this is just from my very cursory view of it. And from our standpoint, it really seems like it's more of a business venture to shake down trademark owners. These questions came up. There was a House Judiciary hearing on this topic not too long ago, and some of the comments stated that .com works perfectly fine. Why do we need more GTLDs, and why is this particular one such a high price? So these are just a few of our concerns with it, and we were supportive. There was a letter that went out from ICANN's business constituency, and we were very supportive of the comments made in that, and we are continuing to follow the process. We've registered .sucks, and the reason we've registered is we're considering these as defensive registries. So I think that's important to understand.
Okay, John, you from a different business perspective.
So I think you have to divide the .sucks issue between should there be a .sucks, should there be new TLDs, and the pricing program for the registry that is operating that name. The new TLD expansion has been a success. Over 5+ million names have been registered. We applied for 307 TLDs. We're now operating about 185. We'll probably get around 200. And our model was, the point, as Jamie mentioned, of the program was to bring competition to the registry space. We want to provide more consumer choice and competition in that space. So if you look at .com as a large downtown department store, we could have competed with it by building another large downtown department store a couple blocks away, like .biz tried. And we decided not to go that route. We decided to build a shopping mall where we have a whole lot of boutiques and some anchor tenants. And our boutiques include .plumbing, .pizza, pretty much other keywords that you can think of. And we don't think .plumbing is going to be the next .com. But if you're a plumber and you want to announce to the world with more semantic meaning what you're doing on the internet, you would want to register .plumbing over .com. It means something. .com doesn't mean anything anymore. So we have a lot of plumbers that are using .plumbing already. A lot of photographers using .photography already. Hard to spell and long, but they love it. So the new TLD program so far is a success. There'll be more names, and with more applicants, they took longer to come out. One of the problems with the program. So some of the even more popular names haven't been released yet, but will come out soon. The new TLD program includes more required protections than in the incumbent TLDs. So if you look at trademark protection, as Peter mentioned and Michelle mentioned, there are a lot more requirements for trademark protection. Mandatory sunrise, which means the trademark holders get the first crack at getting their names. And then a lot of registries layered on additional protections for trademarks. So for example, donuts, because we applied for so many, we have what's called a DPML, or a Domains Protected Marks List, where all you have to do is register your mark with us, and you could block your name across virtually all of our TLDs. So had we operated .sucks, for example, we wouldn't probably be talking about it because it would have just been blocked with any other. Verizon bought one of our blocks, for example, and it would have just been blocked with all the others. I think it's actually unfortunate, Cheryl, that you bought the name and spent the money because, like you said, if someone wants to have a gripe site on the internet, they could do it on .sucks, they could do it on .com, they could do it anywhere. They could do it on Twitter, Facebook. And so, whether it's defensive or not defensive, I'm just surprised that so many people are buying into it and just not ignoring it, which is what I thought probably would happen. But I understand, I guess, from a large corporation standpoint why one would consider that. But I do think it's unfortunate the way they priced it. I think it's unfortunate how trademark holders feel about it, and they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I get that. But I think it's an unfortunate situation.
Peter, you're in the queue. Okay.
Yes, again, at the understanding that newspapers need to sell, and so headlines are provocative. The idea that this is some kind of a shakedown or extortion is just absurd. There's 680 top-level domains, and in every single one of them, as far as I know, including all of the CCTLDs, you can register a NikeSucks.nz or a NikeSucks.Brazil or a TigerWoods.Sucks.golf. The idea that one particular TLD somehow changes the balance and opens you to intolerable abuse is just ridiculous. You're open to that abuse all over the place, and most of you deal with it properly by ignoring it. And because you ignore it, it goes away. So I agree with John. I think if I am an IP lawyer, and if clients come to me and say, what should we do about registering these things? I say, well, how much do you think this is really going to affect your business? And you make a business judgment. It's not a shakedown, because a shakedown or an extortion has something that they hold over you. And the hold in this case, as I say, is almost infinitesimal. But the worst thing about this, I think, is the suggestion that's coming up that ICANN has somehow failed by creating a scheme without price controls. Let me remind you, as Jamie gave in his very accurate description of the development of this process, that it's community-centred. The community examined the fact that .com is price controlled and ran from that immediately. And there is absolutely no suggestion from anyone that ICANN should be in the business of creating price controls over top-level domains. And for people to start suggesting now that that is somehow a mistake and that you want ICANN to be exercising price controls when you want it is a very dangerous retrograde step that I counsel strongly against. ICANN should not be in the business of setting price controls and hasn't. And I'm not quite sure. It's interesting. We've actually got the current chairman of ICANN in the room. I'll ask him afterwards why ICANN thought this was appropriate to send to a particular one only national competition authority. But that's the partial answer. All the competition authorities in the world can exercise abuses of competition law in their jurisdictions when they arise. But say you do not want ICANN becoming your price controller of domain names. Thanks.
So this begs a question then of we covered IANA and now we've covered .sucks. Does one have anything to do with the other? Because they have been linked in the press and in the headlines. Milton, I wonder if you might help us think about that.
Yeah, so this is an example of why the U.S. needs to let go of this special relationship it has with ICANN, because essentially it puts the U.S. Congress and the U.S. political establishment in a position to second-guess the policymaking community that's supposed to be done in ICANN. And there are interests within ICANN and within the United States who will exploit that consistently to take a second bite at the apple. Oh, we lost in the ICANN environment. We didn't get consensus for our favored policy. Let's go to Congress and make a big stink about it and see if we can get it reversed, which completely undermines, of course, the multi-stakeholder model because, you're playing the game and then you're in bad faith shifting the game to another political venue. So let me just say this about .sucks. It's particularly ironic to me to see people like L. Gordon Krovitz making an issue of .sucks because this is the same guy that's telling us that the U.S. has to stay in control because of freedom of speech. And if we don't have the U.S. in control of ICANN, then the freedom of speech on the Internet will be lost. And now he's saying, here's the U.S. should be intervening to stop this .sucks domain as an example of how the U.S. should be intervening to stop something that's bad. Well, what is bad about .sucks? Is it, do you have a right to say that a corporation sucks? Even if it doesn't suck, do you have the right to say it? If any of you think that I suck, I'm sure that I don't, but if you think I do, you can write a book and say that. That can be the title, Milton Mueller Sucks. You can have a book title, you can have a library entry, you can have a domain name that says that. So the idea that sucks is extortion, here's the problem you get into. If you want to create this space that is open and free for people to express these gripes, then how do you prevent defensive registrations? Well, how do you prevent all of the good names of corporations that really do suck from being grabbed by the trademark owners and registered defensively? Well, you price discriminate. You offer it at a low price for the people who want to use it for expressing gripes, and you say if you want to preemptively register that to suppress the expression of people who want to criticize you, well, you have to pay a lot more. Is that kind of a nasty business model? Maybe, but how else would you do it? How else would you deal with this problem? So I think that really has to be borne in mind is that the IANA transition has absolutely nothing to do with whether you think ICANN made a bad policy decision. Under this new regime, ICANN, and we all get together in ICANN, we make the policy, the IANA simply implements it. It decides, does .sucks go into the root or not? That's all IANA does. The decision about whether it should go into the root is a policy decision, and that has to be squarely within the fair and equal environs of ICANN, where everybody's competing for policy on the same playing field.
Cheryl, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just actually wanted to respond to Milton's comment because that's exactly right. I can have MiltonMuellerSucks.com. I don't need to create an entire new GTLD in order to do it. And the freedom of speech, it's there. I don't see how it's not being supported.
Okay, so I have, as part of this panel, we had another section on international implications of all of the. Oh, am I on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. International implications of all this. I don't know, Cheryl. Can I turn to you quickly, very quickly, because I think I see a few hands in the audience who want to ask questions, and I don't want to take all of our time here. So, can you speak quickly about the broader international context for this whole discussion that we're having here? That's a big ask.
That's a really huge ask, and you're probably the best person actually to do that, but I'll give it a shot. I think this is a really critical year. I think, different governments are looking at a lot of new issues that they're dealing with. We have enjoyed amazing growth with respect to the internet. There are still a lot of areas where there is not access, and we're struggling to figure out, okay, how do we connect these different groups and populations with the internet so that they can really harness the benefits of it. I think the multi-stakeholder process is really under a bit of a looking glass, so to speak. I think a lot of us who are within this realm are trying to understand, okay, what are the things that help it to work efficiently and effectively? What things do we need to still work on? I sit on the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group for the Internet Governance Forum, which is a long, fancy name for the group that helps to produce the IGF each year. And the IGF this year is actually up for renewal. We have WSIS ongoing, and so there are a lot of different processes in place. The IANA transition, and all of these are impacting one another and impacting the ecosystem as a whole. And so I think there were some really good points that were raised with respect to concerns of government capture, fragmentation, et cetera. These are all ongoing, and we're all looking at this. I think questions related to, within this process, what is consensus? And how do we come to consensus? As you can see, there are issues that we agree on, and we may vehemently disagree on. And so how do we move forward and make sure that we've created an internet that's safe, secure, and will continue to grow and allow for new innovation globally?
That's excellent. I think I would just say it is important, especially when we're in the seat of government, so to speak, to understand that there are other seats of government all around the world that that care very deeply about this, that have their own sets of interests, and are increasingly part of this discussion and similar kinds of debates going on in other countries. And so we are all in a bigger context than in this room or in this building or in this city. And we see that all the time in the work that we do. Okay, Peter, I'll give you the last word, and then I think, Tim, I can open it up for questions, right? Okay.
Thanks, Sally. It goes back to the question about why are we doing this transition now, and that is it is time to look at the global international context, because, as I said before, ICANN is this extraordinary first time ever that a global resource is managed by this kind of a process instead of by governments and through treaty organizations, and not everybody is happy with that. So one of the very difficult jobs that ICANN has always done, and I think done very well, is kept on side a whole series of governments. There's now about 140, Jamie, or 150 governments working inside ICANN, inside a role that is difficult for them because they are advisory. And as we all know, governments think they're in charge and like to run things because that's what they're there for. So it's been an interesting challenge working out what are the proper areas for governments at home, making national and international policy, and what's their role in terms of advising this new developing kind of body. Outside that, there are other international organizations who don't like that at all, who think government should be in charge, and who fought actively to bring into their own ambit aspects of what we call internet governance. And many of you will remember there were resolutions passed in government houses here in 2012, because coming up at the meeting in Dubai, members of the ITU wanted to bring aspects of internet governance into the international telecommunications regulations, which are international treaties governing telecommunications. And that conference, for the first time ever, collapsed. There'd never been an international treaty on ITRs or telecommunications that failed as badly as that. And the United States government and a number of others withdrew and did not sign the final treaty. So that was part of the background leading up to the International Telecommunications meeting last year, at which, again, some member states opposed to the multi-stakeholder model and the freedom to operate that gives many of us. Tried to bring in, again, into the international United Nations ambit some of the aspects of internet governance. And I'm delighted to say, with the efforts of Sally and the Internet Society and people in the room, the global internet community managed to make sure that didn't happen again. So it's important to understand that not everyone understands or is happy with the solution that we're now arguing about the minutiae of. There are some people who fundamentally disagree that the technical community should have a vote and that academics and government should all come together and make policy in this way.
So that's an excellent summary. I've seen a few hands go up throughout the meeting, and I would be surprised if we managed to cover this range of topics without at least confusing some people. We've got a lot of hands. So I did see this woman here who's black, purple, I think. I don't know. And then I see one here. Oh, boy. All right. We've got lots. Okay. And I see. Can you stand up and just, there we go. Oh, God. Oh, no, the joys of moderating. The question was, or the comment was first, support free markets, but a concern about extortion and whether whitehouse.com is an example of the way in which a domain name could be used as extortion against another legitimate entity. Is that a fair statement? Okay. Yeah. So,
well, there's a whole genre of cyber squatters called porn squatters. The famous John Zuccherini did this. Not only would you get porn when you went to a domain he had squatted, but you would get cascading, browser after browser window jumping up on your screen with new forms of porn. So he really took it to almost a level of fine art or some kind of weird conceptual art. But the point is, he was prosecuted and under basically some kind of concept of tarnishment, and his goal was tarnishment. But if you're typing in, Verizon.Sucks or Milton Mueller sucks, and you find a bunch of negative information about Verizon or Milton, what's wrong with that? Okay, it's not deceptive. It's not like if anybody says anything negative about me on the internet. What's bad about these porn squatters is that they are playing off the expectation that you will find the White House at this website, and then you're getting porn. And the White House, even during the Bush administration, was actually pretty tolerant of this for a long, long time. I don't know how it actually got cleaned up, because the last time I looked, it was still there, but that was like 10 years ago, I think.
Cheryl, you want to respond?
No, I just wanted to clarify. As I mentioned earlier, it's not about the freedom of speech piece. It's the process in which this particular GTLD was rolled out. There were a lot of issues that the business community had with this, and so that's the core of where we take issue. I think you can say, I fully support freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want on the internet, and that's why like I said, there already is a Verizon.Sucks.com. That's fine.
And additionally, I agree with Cheryl, but also just the confusion to small business owners about sort of this process and sort of what their role is and what their requirements are. It continues to be sort of a process fraught with confusion.
Makes my life easier. Okay, we have two tough questions there. Peter's got his hand up. Good.
Oh, I'm going to take the first one, if I may, and leave the net neutrality one to a more US lawyer. What you've touched on is something that's been a constant debate at ICANN, and I'm not sure that we've got the solution correct. The current solution, just to jump to it, is you are allowed to reserve behind a proxy. So if you have a name, there are professional proxy servers, and most registrars offer a proxy service. And that itself has been a very contentious debate. There are a lot of people who've come to ICANN and said that should not be allowed. I should be able to find whoever I'm dealing with and whoever is infringing my copyright and so on. And they make a good argument, because some of the people hiding behind proxy servers are very bad people. But at the same time, we've had to recognize that that kind of service is available to protect very good people. And so come to an ICANN meeting, because yours is exactly the kind of input we need into what is actually a very, very difficult policy debate. So there are mechanisms. We keep working on it.
I do want to say I appreciate your point of view of there's a broad set of stakeholders that are impacted by these kinds of decisions. So we have a group up here, but we're all, I think, fairly mindful of the broad nature of this. So I think that's a very good point. Cheryl raised her hand, said she'd take on the net neutrality one. So
sure, and I clearly my company shares your concern, and we're actually starting to see areas where it is having a negative impact. The U.S. decision in other countries, for example, what's happening in India right now with respect to the laws that they're reviewing. So we've yet to see the full ripple effect of it, but other countries clearly we're watching very closely with respect to the U.S. decision, and we are noticing that there is the potential for negative impact globally. And with respect to the ITU, I share your concern for what could be happening there as well.
So there's a gentleman standing in the back. You? Yes? You. So I'm just going to repeat that in case people on the other side of the room didn't hear. I think we can hear now on the webcast, but not as well. The gentleman raised a question about the fact that ICANN is currently headquartered in California, and a question of jurisdiction. How does this continue to be governed post-transition, and how do you enforce those governance rules depending on the jurisdiction question? So, John? Okay.
I'll take it. Great question. Thank you for that. Couple of responses. One is ICANN has been upfront about the fact that the entity will stay as a California non-for-profit corporation, so it will stay under California law. One of the proposals that many folks are pushing is to make that a bylaw, so make that a required bylaw. Another bylaw that that many of us are pushing for is what we affectionately call the golden bylaw, which can't be changed very easily. So it's not like the ICANN board could change the bylaws. So all this work that we're doing as a community to change the ICANN bylaws and change the accountability structures can't just be undone by the board very easily. We want certain bylaws that would have additional protection and would require community support in order for have those to be changed, one of which could be the jurisdiction.
Yeah, sure, Milton. So, Milton, you wanted to address the jurisdiction question, and then we have a question about there's a proposal on the Hill that the GAO review whatever final plan comes out, and the question was, what's the view of the panelists on that proposal? But, Milton, over to you on jurisdiction.
Well, it's actually related, but so jurisdiction has actually fallen kind of by the wayside, at least within the working groups, because I think what people have started to realize is that wherever ICANN is, it's going to be subject to U.S. jurisdiction, European jurisdiction. Any kind of major power that wants to make an issue with what ICANN does is going to be able to do so. And we've been working very intimately within the framework of California law to create these new accountability mechanisms. And if we suddenly stepped outside of that into a new legal regime, we would be kind of starting from scratch. We wouldn't know exactly what to do. And you have to know, and this is something that's dawned on everybody involved, you have to know what the actual legal requirements and constraints are of these systems. And I think post-FIFA, the FIFA scandal, I think people are not so excited about the idea of moving it to Switzerland anymore. Some of them were. And so there's no way you're going to escape U.S. jurisdiction, and there's all kinds of benefits to keeping it, the devil you know. So that's how I would respond to the jurisdiction question.
Is there any point of view on the GAO, this proposal for GAO review? I'm not sure anybody. Oh, Michelle.
The GAO review, I think, is an interesting step and one that might garnish some good perspective. So I guess I would be in support of the GAO review at this time.
So, Tim, I just want to be sensitive. Oh, yeah.
So
I have 1 minute. One more question. Okay.
Sorry. So, obviously ICANN doesn't take a position on any U.S. domestic legislation, whether, existing or in development. But what's important through this process and what the rest of the world is looking for is how much confidence does the United States have in the multi-stakeholder model? And to the extent that the evaluation of a proposal is outsourced to anything but the multi-stakeholder community, undermines the view that this really is a different model.
Okay, we have one more question here, sir. You get the stand up if you don't mind. Yeah, it's on. Yeah. So the question is about whether what Jamie's views in particular, and then others on the panel of the FTC letter in response to this concern about .sucks. Chairwoman had some specific recommendations, and then there was an overall tone, I think, in that letter as well.
So a couple of things. First, we think it's great that the Federal Trade Commission continues to be involved with ICANN. They've had a long involvement with us. What this letter illustrates, in part, the part that had nothing to do with the .sucks issue, is that even the U.S. government is going to continue to have a major role within ICANN long after the transition. In terms of the specific recommendations, as many know, a lot of those issues were discussed among the community before the program was launched. We are now in the middle of beginning a review of the program, and the community will again presumably discuss a lot of these same issues and determine whether or not changes or improvements need to be made along the lines suggested by Chairman Ramirez or others in the community.
Any other views on the chairwoman's letter?
Just a reminder that it's one government agency from one country of the world, and if ICANN pays too much attention to it, that will undermine completely the processes that we've been talking about. Good suggestions, if that's what they are, from regulatory agencies need to come through a proper ICANN process, and this kind of correspondence is interesting, but it has to be effective. They have to come into an ICANN process. If they're talking about increasing IP protection, which I'm in favour of, and I think most people are, then there's a whole process for strengthening the IP protections. So I'm just cautioning, about the relationships. For ICANN to be taking on board letters from individual governments is a dangerous course of action.
Milton.
Following up on that, I'm pointing the finger at Jamie here and saying you shouldn't have never passed those letters on to the FTC and asked for their advice. That simply shouldn't have happened. You should have said, we passed this policy. It came out of our process. The policy was implemented. If you don't like it, if you think it's actually illegal in U.S. jurisdiction, then sue them under the U.S., but it's not our job to do that. But I think ICANN is a bit intimidated now by the transition and by the pressure that's put on them by Congress and by some of the special interests that are very powerful in the Washington framework. So in a way, they were capitulating. They were saying, look, we really can be called on the carpet by the U.S. government, and we really can, back off of our own policies and our own processes if you guys put enough pressure on us. And I think that was wrong. It shouldn't have happened.
Thanks, Milton. Just to respond quickly, and what we did in that instance is what we've done in similar instances both in the U.S. and around the world, which is when we are presented with an issue that we believe is outside of our remit, outside of our expertise, as we were with the letter, having to deal with competition concerns. We're not a competition authority. We handed it over to the relevant competition authorities, the FTC and OCA. We do that in other contexts. We did it before the transition. We'll do it after the transition.
So I think that's going to be the last word. We've overstayed our welcome here in the room. It's good to see everybody still here. We kept a lot of your attention, so it must be an interesting topic. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists, and thanks to the Internet Caucus.